The morning of September 12th had begun like any other for Robert Harrison. He had opened his beloved little electronics shop, Harrison's Tech, at 7:30, as he did every day for the last 22 years. The familiar scent of electronics and new devices filled the air as he unlocked the door for the day. It was his life's work, and he intended for it to live on after him, providing for his family and teaching his kids the value of hard work and honesty to make a living. However, everything changed for Robert at 10:15, when 3 police cars pulled up outside his shop's door. As the officers marched inside, his customers gasped in horror. One young employee dropped a box of smartphones in disbelief as he stumbled backwards in panic. Robert raised his hands in surrender as the policeman grabbed hold of his arms, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. "What is this all about?" he demanded. "Illegal narcotics. You are under arrest, Robert Harrison," said one officer, who introduced himself as Daniel Morrison. He was a tall man with piercing blue eyes and a smirk on his face that made Robert's stomach churn. "Officer Morrison, this is insane. I run an electronics store. I wouldn't do something like that in my life." Robert protested as the policeman cuffed him and shoved him up against the wall. "Save your energy for the jail cell, old man. We've gotten a tip that you have been using your shop as a front for drug trafficking for the last 6 months of this year," said Daniel, ignoring Robert's pleas of innocence. "This is ridiculous. I would never do such a thing," said Robert, his eyes wide with disbelief as he glanced towards his terrified employees. He watched as Sarah, his wife, ran into the shop from the back room, her eyes red with rage and fear. "Robert, what is happening?" she demanded. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know," he replied as they shoved him into the back of the police car. The next few hours were a blur for Robert as he was fingerprinted and questioned by the detectives. Finally, he was brought to a gray room with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. "You have the right to an attorney," said Officer Morrison as he slid a file in front of Robert on the table. "Sign this confession, and we'll give you a lighter sentence. It states that you admitted to authorities that you ran the drug trafficking organization, and that you will provide us with the names of your business partners." "This is a lie. I never confessed to anything," Robert exclaimed, his eyes nearly popping out of his skull as he stared at the file in horror. "Would you rather have the judge decide your sentence, old man? Sign the paper, and it will all be over soon enough," said Daniel, his smirk wider than ever as he leaned back in his chair. "I will never sign this document. It is my name, and you can't take it from me," said Robert defiantly. The next few days were the darkest days of Robert's life. He was forced to return to his shop as he was released on bail, but it was no longer the happy place he used to know. The customers who once shopped at his store were now giving him dirty looks, and his employees were watching him with a mixture of pity and disgust. Sarah tried her best to cheer him up, bringing him coffee in the morning and telling him he was a good man and that they would get through this together. Still, Robert could see the fear in her eyes when she reminded him of his upcoming trial. Robert knew he had to do something. It was apparent to him that the fabricated confession was meant to destroy his life. He had no intention of wasting away in prison for something he didn't do. He had to find some way to prove his innocence, and he had to do it fast. Robert hired a famous defense attorney, Jennifer Clark, who had experience dealing with corrupt officials. She paid him a visit at his house and read over the file with a grim expression on her face. "These cops are corrupt, Robert, and we have to take them down. You have a right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney. They planted a fake confession in your hands, so we need to prove that you were not at the shop when the alleged drugs were said to have been distributed," said Jennifer. "Wait, do you mean to say that I have to prove my innocence?" asked Robert in disbelief. "I pay for those phones, and I run that store." Yes, you do. That is why we need evidence that you were not there when those drugs were supposedly distributed," said Jennifer. "Do you have any leads?" "Actually, I believe I might have something," said Robert as he rushed to his office and searched through a few folders on his desk. Finally, he found what he was looking for: a small, crumpled-up receipt from an electronics store in the neighboring city. He turned it over to show the date and time. "September 12th at 9:45 a.m., he said. "That means you were not at the shop when the alleged deal was supposed to happen at 10:00 a.m., said Jennifer. "That means I was 50+ miles away from the shop when those cops accused me of distributing drugs in it. That means I was in the next city, negotiating a deal for new laptop batteries." "That is a solid lead, Robert. We need more evidence, though," said Jennifer. "Do you know anyone who was with you when you were at the J&J Electronics Supply?" "Yes, actually. I remember that the assistant to the manager, a young man named Marcus, brought me a cup of coffee while I was waiting for him. He can vouch for me being there at that time," said Robert. "All right, I will look into it. I will find him and get his statement. We will take those liars down, Robert. They think they can get away with planting evidence and covering up their tracks, but they are wrong. We will prove your innocence," said Jennifer. Over the next few days, Robert gathered every scrap of evidence he could find, while Jennifer searched for Marcus and dug up information about the other officers involved. Meanwhile, Daniel Morrison was becoming increasingly agitated. He wanted Robert to sign the false confession and hoped that he would finally stop fighting them. Daniel began threatening witnesses who gave statements for Robert's defense, telling them they would end up in prison if they continued being disrespectful to the police force. Jennifer began recording every conversation she had with witnesses and filing reports about the threats. When Daniel called Robert to threaten him, telling him to drop the case and accept the charges because he was a pathetic shopkeeper, Robert finally had enough of it. "Officer Morrison, you are not the law. You are a lying piece of garbage, and the truth will come out eventually. I'll see you in court," said Robert. The day of the trial arrived, and Robert stood in the large courtroom, his hands clasped together in front of him. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and he wore his best navy suit, the same one he wore to his daughter's wedding. To his left, Jennifer reviewed her notes while his loving wife, Sarah, sat in the front row, watching him with tear-filled eyes. She mouthed the words, "I love you," to him as he took his seat at the defendant's table. As Daniel Morrison arrived, Robert's stomach turned at the sight of him. The arrogant man wore his crisp uniform and a smug expression on his face as he gave the judge a bow. He sat at the prosecutor's table, where he exchanged a few smug remarks with the district attorney. Robert felt his anger boil at the sight of him. He knew that this man had ruined the lives of many innocent people before him, and he was determined to stop him from doing the same to him. The prosecutor wasted no time in giving his opening statement. He described Robert as a crafty drug dealer who used his shop as a front for his drug trafficking business. He stood in front of the jury, pacing up and down the room as he said, "This man confessed to his crimes and signed a document stating his guilt in front of witnesses. There is no denying the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." The jurors all gave him skeptical looks, and Robert knew this was his chance to finally show the court what kind of man he really was. When the judge gave permission for Jennifer to cross-examine the prosecutor, she stood up from her seat and looked Morrison straight in the eye. "Officer Morrison, you said in your report that Mr. Harrison confessed to his crimes willingly, correct?" asked Jennifer. "Yes. He admitted to me in the interrogation room that he distributed illegal narcotics and provided me with the names of his business partners," replied Daniel. "And you wrote down everything he said in the report, is that right?" asked Jennifer. "Yes, it is," said Daniel. "And you have the document that proves Mr. Harrison's guilt in this case?" "Of course I do. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would like to present Exhibit A, which proves Mr. Harrison's innocence," said Jennifer as she opened her briefcase to reveal a plastic folder with a single receipt inside. This receipt shows that Mr. Harrison was at the J&J Electronics Supply in the neighboring city at 9:45 a.m. This is nearly an hour after the alleged drug deal was said to have occurred in his shop, 50-plus miles away. There was a hushed gasp that came from the jury as they all stared at the receipt in shock. Daniel paled as he looked at it, and Robert felt a wave of relief wash over him. Jennifer continued speaking as she presented more evidence in front of the court. She pulled out CCTV camera stills, witness statements, and a parking ticket from the city where the J&J Electronics Supply was located, which stated the time as 9:50 a.m. "Finally, I would like to present this phone recording," said Jennifer as she played it for the court. It consisted of Daniel threatening Robert to drop the case, saying that he would end up in prison if he continued his pathetic behavior. "Officer Morrison, you fabricated this evidence to frame